The wedding was perfect. The venue was perfect. The dress was perfect. 300 guests sat in the kind of room that takes months to arrange and looks effortless on the day, and the woman walking down the aisle had earned every detail of it in ways that most of those 300 people did not fully know. She was seconds from the altar. She was seconds from saying the words that would make permanent what had already been real for years. And then the doors at the back of the room opened and a woman walked through them with the specific confidence of someone who has decided that they are about to take something that belongs to someone else. And the man at the altar, the man she had found when he had nothing and had poured herself into until he had everything, looked at the woman who had once told him he was not worth staying for, and he made a choice. And the choice destroyed the right person and freed the wrong one. And the woman he chose showed him, with remarkable efficiency, exactly what she thought he was actually worth. Stay with me. Because this story ends in a place neither of them saw coming, and only one of them deserved to arrive there. Welcome to Bishop Tales, where every week we bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else in this world? We love knowing where our family is. Now let us begin. Her name was Adaeze Okonkwo and she was 34 years old and she had spent the last 5 years of her professional life doing something that most people in her industry did not fully understand, which was finding human beings who had something real inside them before the world had found them and helping that something become the thing it was always going to be. She was not a philanthropist. She was not operating from sentiment. She was operating from a very precise understanding of the gap between potential and execution and from the belief, built on evidence accumulated over years, that the gap was almost never about the quality of the idea. It was almost always about access, presentation, and the specific kind of guidance that most people who need it most are least able to afford. She had grown up in Enugu in a household where her father was an engineer who approached every problem with the methodical patience of someone who understands that the correct solution reached carefully is worth more than 10 fast solutions reached carelessly, and her mother was a woman who had run a small import business for 20 years and who had taught Adaeze, through example rather than instruction, that the most durable thing a person can build is a reputation for being exactly what they say they are. She had internalized both of these things completely. Her father's precision and her mother's integrity had produced a person who was difficult to fool and genuinely useful to people who were doing something real. She worked as an independent growth strategist, which meant in practice that she sat across from people who had built something genuine but had not yet found the right way to present it to the people who could fund its growth, and she told them the truth about why, and then she helped them do something about it. She had 3 clients at any given time and turned down significantly more than she accepted, and her selectivity was not performative. It was the selectivity of someone who has learned that the most valuable resource in her work is the accuracy of her judgment and that diluting the judgment by spreading it too thin costs more than the additional revenue it produces. The evening she met Adaeze, she was at a technology and innovation showcase in the city that she attended every year, not to network in the social sense but to observe, which was how she used most events, as information-gathering exercises rather than social ones. She was standing near the back of the room with a drink she had not yet tasted, watching a man pitch to a group of people who were doing what people do when they are disengaging from a conversation they have decided is not going anywhere, which is to make themselves physically smaller by degrees, shifting weight back, checking phones at a frequency that increases as the discomfort increases. The man pitching was tall and lean and was wearing a blazer that had been pressed for the occasion and shoes that had seen better years. He was pitching a software solution for small business financial management, a tool he had built to address a problem he had identified from working in financial services for 6 years and watching small business owners repeatedly fail to survive problems that better financial visibility would have allowed them to anticipate and address. The idea was sound. She could hear the soundness in the way he described the problem, which was specific and accurate in a way that only someone who had lived with the problem could make it specific and accurate. What she could also hear was the way the presentation of the solution kept losing the thread that connected the problem to it, kept making assumptions about the audience's prior knowledge that the audience did not have, kept pitching the features rather than the consequence of the features for the person who would be using them. She watched the group continue to shrink. She watched him push harder in response to the shrinking, which was the instinct and the wrong one. When the group dispersed, she set down her untasted drink and walked over. She said she had a question. He looked at her with the guardedness of someone who has been asked enough questions that have turned out to be dismissals in disguise to be cautious about questions from strangers. She asked him to explain the problem his software solved as though she was a small business owner who had never heard of financial management software and was not certain she needed it. He stared at her for a moment. Then he began to explain. The explanation was better than the pitch. The pitch was talking to an imagined sophisticated audience. The explanation was talking to her, and he was good at talking to people when he was talking to a person rather than performing to a category. She asked 3 more questions. Each one pulled him further into genuine conversation and further away from presentation mode, and in genuine conversation the quality of what he had built was evident in a way the presentation had been obscuring. She gave him her card at the end. She said she thought he had something real and a communication problem and that the two were often confused and she was interested in helping with the communication problem if he was interested in talking. He looked at the card and looked at her and said yes. He called the following morning. They talked for 2 hours. By the end of the week he had come to her office and she had gone through his materials with the specific attention she brought to things she had decided were worth her attention, identifying precisely what was working and what was not and why, and doing it with the directness that she had always considered one of the most respectful things she could offer a person who needed accurate information and not careful management of their feelings. He received the directness the way she had assessed he would, which was to say he listened and processed and asked good questions and did not defend himself unnecessarily against things that were true. That was itself information about what he was. She invested in the work. Her own money first, to keep his development timeline alive at a point where he had been about to conclude that he needed to take a full-time job to sustain himself and would therefore not have the time to finish what he had started. She brought her network, which was not the largest network in the industry but was composed of people who trusted her assessment because she had not previously given them reason not to. She rebuilt the narrative around his product from the ground up, not changing what it was but changing the way it was presented so that the people who heard it could receive it accurately rather than being required to work too hard to understand it. She sat with him through late evenings before significant presentations. She was the last voice he heard before he walked into the rooms that mattered and the first voice he debriefed with when he came out of them. In the process of all of this, something else grew that neither of them had planned and both of them recognized and neither of them tried to prevent because it was honest and they were both people who operated honestly. He was genuinely funny in a way she had not expected, with the particular dry humor of someone who has spent years observing things carefully and has noticed the absurdity in them. He was honest about the difficulty of what he was trying to do without being self-pitying about it. He asked about her with the genuine curiosity of someone who wants to know rather than the social curiosity of someone who is performing interest. She started looking forward to the evenings in a way that was clearly about more than the work. He started finding reasons to extend them. Within 3 years his platform had over 40,000 small business users and was growing at a pace that had attracted the kind of investment attention that turns a product into a company. The press wrote about him with the vocabulary the press uses for founders who come from nowhere and build something significant: individual genius, self-made vision, remarkable origin story. Adaeze was mentioned in some of these pieces and absent from others, and she did not particularly concern herself with either outcome because she had not done what she had done in order to be in the story. She had done it because the work was worth doing and the outcome was its own reward. He told her regularly, privately, that none of it would exist without her. She told him that was not entirely true, that it would exist without her, it just would have taken longer and arrived differently. He said the difference was everything. She allowed that. He asked her to marry him on an evening in December at a restaurant he had reserved entirely for the two of them, in the specific understated way of a man who knows the woman he is asking well enough to know that production is not what she is interested in. The ring he had chosen was not the largest available. It was the most considered. She looked at it and looked at him and said yes without requiring time to think about it because she had spent 3 years watching who he was and she had the data she needed. They planned the wedding over 8 months. Everything was chosen together, deliberately, in the way that two careful people plan something that is supposed to last. The venue was a restored historic building in the city with the kind of natural light that makes everything look the way it should look on an occasion that deserves to be remembered accurately. The guest list was 300 people who represented the genuine social geography of both their lives. The dress was not trying to be the story. It was trying to be exactly right. It was exactly right. On the morning of the wedding, Adaeze stood in the bridal suite while her best friend Kayamika adjusted the final detail and stepped back and looked at her and said that Adaeze was the most fortunate man currently alive in this country and possibly in several surrounding territories. Adaeze said she was not interested in fortunate. She was interested in the life they were going to build together. Kayamika said that was the most Adaeze sentence she had ever heard, which was the most affectionate thing she knew how to say. Across the building, Tabena was in the groom's suite with his two closest friends and was doing what people do in those rooms, which is to be present in their body while also being somewhere else inside their thoughts. He was thinking about the networking event 3 years ago and the woman who had walked over and said she had a question and had asked that question in a way that told him she actually wanted the answer. He was thinking about everything that had happened between that moment and this one. He was thinking about the specific quality of being known by someone who has seen you clearly at your worst and chosen you anyway. He said he was ready. He meant it without reservation. The ceremony began. The music was live and restrained and perfect. Adaeze walked through the doors at the back of the room and 300 people turned and the room produced the collective intake of breath that rooms produce when something beautiful is happening in them that everyone present recognizes as real. Tabena watched her come toward him and felt the weight of it, not the performance weight of an occasion but the actual weight of understanding what he was receiving. She reached him. He took her hands. The officiant spoke. And then, when they were perhaps 2 minutes from the exchange of vows, the doors at the back of the room opened again and the music stuttered and 300 people turned for the second time in 5 minutes and the woman who walked through the doors was not late, which Adaeze understood the moment she saw her, because late people are apologetic and this woman was not apologetic. She was deliberate. Her name was Neka. She had been with Tabena for 2 years before Adaeze had entered the picture, in the long period of rejection before the company existed and before anything was visible to anyone who was not prepared to look at what was there rather than at what was not yet there. She had made her decision about that period with the clarity of a person who needed things she could see and Tabena's prospects had not been visible to her. She had said things when she left that a person says when they are ending something and have decided that the honesty of how they feel is more important than the effect of the delivery. She had said he was chasing something that had a small chance of arriving. She had said she needed certainty. She had left. He had been devastated and had built everything he built in the years that followed with that devastation as one of its components. She stood in the aisle and said his name. She said she was sorry to interrupt, which her manner made clear she was not. She said she had realized something. She said 3 years of watching from a distance what he had become had made her understand the scale of her mistake. She said they were unfinished. She asked him to choose. The room held its breath. Adaeze stood at the altar and looked at Neka with the expression of a woman who is processing something that is both impossible and, in some small honest part of her, not entirely surprising, because she had seen the way Tabena sometimes paused when Neka's name came up in conversation and had noted the pause and filed it as information without allowing herself to fully weight it. She said Neka's name quietly and clearly. She said this was not the place. She said whatever Neka believed she felt did not earn her a place in this ceremony. She said it without raising her voice because she did not raise her voice in situations that did not require it and this situation required precision, not volume. Neka looked at her briefly. With the specific look of someone who has assessed an obstacle and concluded it is not an obstacle. Then she looked back at Tabena. She said she knew she had hurt him. She said she was standing in front of everyone saying so because she was not willing to let him marry the wrong person without saying what she knew. She asked him to choose. Adaeze looked at Tabena. She looked at him with 3 years behind her eyes, every late evening and every rebuilt presentation and every conversation that had run past midnight because neither of them wanted it to end. She looked at him and waited for him to be who she had believed him to be. She waited for the choice that 3 years of knowing each other accurately should have made straightforward. He did not look back at her immediately. His eyes had gone to Neka. And in the going of them Adaeze felt the thing she had not wanted to feel because she was a precise person and she had felt the same thing once before, years ago, in a different context, and she knew what the feeling meant. She felt the crack. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just the specific internal sound of something she had been standing on shifting beneath her weight. She said his name. She said, "Look at me." He turned. And the look was not the look of 3 minutes ago. The look had something in it she had never directed at her before. Conflict. The presence of Neka pulling in a direction that was not toward Adaeze. And Adaeze, who had spent 3 years making accurate assessments as a professional practice, made an accurate assessment of what she was looking at. Tebena tried to speak. He started sentences and abandoned them. Nneka waited with the patience of someone who understands that silence is working in her favor. She moved closer to him. She touched his arm. The touching of his arm appeared to resolve something that the previous 3 years had not fully resolved, and what it resolved was not in Adaeze's favor. He said he was sorry. He said it to Adaeze. He said he had believed what he felt for Nneka was finished and he had been wrong about that and he could not stand at an altar and make a commitment that some part of him was not fully making. He said it in the voice of a man who understands that what he is saying is catastrophically inadequate and says it anyway because he cannot find anything adequate. Adaeze's bouquet fell. She did not drop it. Her hands simply stopped maintaining the grip. She stood for a moment in the absolute silence that follows the kind of public event that no one present knows how to respond to, and then she sat down, not dramatically, simply because remaining standing was no longer the instruction her body was able to follow. Kayamika was beside her before she had fully settled. Holding her with the arms of someone who has known her long enough to know what she needs and does not require instruction. Tebena walked out with Nneka. They walked down the aisle he had walked up alone 15 minutes ago and out through the doors she had walked through, and the room remained in the specific suspended silence of a gathering that came to witness one thing and is now inside a completely different thing and has not yet located the appropriate response. Adaeze sat on the floor of the venue she had spent 8 months planning and looked at the scattered petals and thought about a networking event and a man with worn shoes and a question asked and everything that had come after that question and what all of it had just become. She did not cry immediately. The crying came later, in private, with the full force of something that had earned the right to be fully felt. What she felt in that moment was not primarily sadness. It was a clear and painful and complete understanding that the man who had just walked out was not who she had invested in believing he was, or was no longer that person, or had never entirely been that person in the way that the most important part of her had needed him to be. Either way, what she had loved no longer existed in the place she had been loving it. This was not the end of her story. It was the end of a version of it. Now friends, I want to pause here because if you are watching this and something inside you is asking how a person comes back from a moment like that, you are exactly where Bishop Tales wants you to be. Please like this video right now and drop a comment. Tell us, have you ever poured everything into someone who could not hold it when the real test came? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do so right now because this story still has a very long way to go and where it arrives is somewhere you need to see. For the first 2 weeks Adaeze disappeared from every public context she normally occupied. The internet did not extend her the same courtesy. Someone's phone had been recording from the moment the doors opened and the footage had found its audience with the specific speed of content that contains both suffering and spectacle. The headlines were the headlines. The opinions were the opinions. She watched none of it because she had never regulated her sense of herself by what external commentary produced, and she was not about to start in the middle of the most difficult period of her adult life. She spent those 2 weeks doing what she had always done when something needed to be processed properly, which was to give it the full weight of her honest attention. She did not reframe it prematurely. She did not rush toward the lesson before the wound had been allowed to be unwound. She loved him. She had been betrayed. Both of those things were true and neither cancelled the other, and she was not going to simplify the truth of the experience in order to arrive at healing faster than the experience was designed to be processed. She was also, by the end of the 2nd week, beginning to think about the future. Not with performed optimism, with the orientation of a person who has always lived forward and for whom the question is never what happened but what happens next. She had skills. She had a record. She had a network that had been built on the accuracy of her judgment and the consistency of her integrity. She had a reputation. None of those things had left the venue with Tebena. She had brought them. They were entirely hers. On the 28th day she got up at her usual time, dressed as she always dressed, went to her desk, and started making plans. She named the firm Okonkwo Advisory Group. She focused it on exactly what she knew most precisely: early-stage businesses that had something real and needed the kind of honest strategic support that could turn what was real into what was recognized. The first clients came through her existing network, people who had watched her work for years from a respectful distance and who now had a direct door to knock on. They knocked because her reputation had preceded her in every room she had ever worked in, and the reputation had always been the same. She tells you what is true. She helps you do something about it. The firm grew with the speed that genuine competence applied to genuine need reliably produces. Within 6 months she had closed deals that the industry noticed. Within a year her name was appearing in publications that had previously only mentioned her in relation to Tabena, and appearing differently, as the primary subject rather than the supporting context. She gave one interview at a major business conference in which a journalist asked her how it felt to be operating in the orbit of the company she had helped build. She looked at the journalist for a moment and said she had never been in anyone's orbit. She said she had been a source that other things moved around. She said she had redirected herself and everything she was building now was moving around her. The recording of that answer was shared more than anything she had said in the previous 3 years. She did not follow the sharing of it. She was too busy working. She did not seek a personal life. She allowed it to remain private, not because she was still in pain but because she had arrived at a clarity that she wanted to preserve in its current precise form before adding anything to it. She had learned something in the venue that day that she had known before but had not felt in her body and therefore not fully known, which was that love without the quality of a person's actual character underneath it is not the stable thing it appears to be. She was finished investing in instability. When the right thing arrived she would know it because she trusted her assessments and her assessments now had additional data that she intended to use. On the other side of the city, Tabena was discovering what he had chosen. The first weeks with Nneka felt like vindication. She was everything she had remembered and presented herself as more. She was attentive in the ways that had been missing the first time. She said he had always been exceptional and she had been too limited in her vision to see it before. She told him she saw it now. She said it with the conviction of someone who has rehearsed what a person in love sounds like and delivered the rehearsal well. He received it with the specific vulnerability of a man who had spent years building in part to prove something to the part of himself that had believed her the first time she told him he was not worth staying for. It felt like resolution. It felt like finally being understood by the only person whose understanding he had wanted from the beginning. He did not notice the adjustments arriving. They were gradual and they came with good explanations and individually each one made sense while the pattern they were composing remained outside his attention. She said she wanted to help with his scheduling because he was overextended and she was worried about him. She said she could see things about his business from the outside that he could not see from the inside and that she could protect his interests better with more direct involvement. She attended meetings that had not previously required her. She began to know more about the internal structure of his company than could be explained by the involvement she had declared. She spoke on his behalf in contexts where he had not authorized her to speak. She made decisions that were attributed to him that had not been made by him. His board asked questions. She managed the questions before they reached him with the skill of someone who has planned the management of them. Staff who raised concerns found the concerns deflected. The information that reached Tabena was filtered through her in ways he had not formally arranged and had somehow come to accept without having actively decided to accept them because the arrangement had been created gradually enough that each step felt like the natural continuation of the previous one. And Tabena, held in the comfort of what he believed was love, did not look carefully enough at the architecture being built around him. He was comfortable for the first time in a very long time, and comfort is a condition that does not ask the questions that discomfort asks. He fell on a Thursday evening in his own home on a staircase that had been polished recently and that he trusted completely. He fell without warning and the fall was fast and significant, and when the ambulance came and the hospital received him the assessment was serious. The injury to his spine and his brain was of a kind that took from him immediately and substantially, his mobility severely compromised, his speech reduced to fragments, his physical control uncertain and unreliable. He was aware of everything. He could not respond to what he was aware of. He lay in the hospital bed and received the world through the full clarity of his consciousness and the near-total limitation of his ability to act in it. Nneka was at his bedside with the attentiveness of someone who knows that presence is being observed and performs it accordingly. She spoke to his medical team. She spoke to his board. She managed the information about his condition in the same way she had managed information about his business, which was to say she managed it in the interest of her own position rather than his. Documents arrived at his bedside. She explained them briefly and directed his hand. His control was poor and his understanding of what he was signing was dependent entirely on her explanation of it because he could not read properly in his current state and asking questions was not something his voice was available to facilitate. He signed. He signed because he trusted her and because the training of the previous months had embedded the trust deeply enough that the injury had not yet destabilized it. When the full dimension of what had been signed became clear to him over several weeks as his comprehension sharpened faster than his mobility recovered, he sat with it in the silence of a man who understands what has happened to him and cannot yet determine what, if anything, he can do about it. His phone was on the side table. It had been there for days and he had not touched it because there was no one he had felt the right to reach for. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Adaeze. He thought about the altar and the petals on the floor. He thought about the specific thing he had traded and what he had traded it for, and he did not look away from the full dimension of that accounting because he had nowhere else to look and no more comfortable version of it to inhabit. He reached for the phone with a hand that did not cooperate. The screen was difficult. His fingers were uncertain. He typed slowly and with great effort. He said he was not safe. He said what had been done. He said please. He sent it before the part of him that was managing his remaining dignity could override the part of him that understood he was beyond the point where dignity was the most relevant consideration. Then the phone fell from his hand and he sat with the silence and the waiting. Adaeze was in the middle of a strategy session with two of her senior partners when her phone showed his name. She looked at the name for a moment. She read the message once. She read it again. Something settled in her that was not about him, that was about what she knew to be true about what had been built and what had been contributed to building it, and about the fact that fraud committed against something you helped create is not something you are required to observe in silence when you have the capacity and the standing to do something about it. She told her partners to continue without her. She walked to her car with her phone already at her ear. She did not do what she did for him. She was completely clear with herself about this in the way that she was always clear with herself about her motivations, which she considered a basic form of intellectual hygiene. She did it because what had been done was wrong and documentable, and she was in a unique position to help document it. She did it because her professional work was partly constituted by the value she had helped create in his company, and watching that value be systematically dismantled by someone operating in deliberate bad faith was something she was not prepared to observe passively when action was available. She did it because she was the kind of person who, when positioned in front of a wrong that she can address, addresses it. She had always been this person. The altar had not changed this person. The investigators she engaged were thorough. NECA had been careful, which was different from being invisible. The arrangements she had constructed left the kinds of trails that leave trails in the specific kinds of documents that professional investigators know how to locate. The fraud was documented precisely. The manipulation of consent was legally challengeable. The authorities were contacted with a complete evidential package rather than a description of a concern, which meant the response was fast and the response was decisive. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning at a time that NECA had not been given the opportunity to prepare for. Tabena watched from his wheelchair by the window of the house that had nearly been taken from him as the process he had been unable to initiate from inside his own helplessness was completed by someone acting from outside it. He watched NECA walk past him on the way out with people who were not his staff. She looked at him once. The look was not the look of someone who regrets what they have done. It was the look of someone who has calculated and been outmatched in the calculation and has accepted this without additional expression because expression requires an audience that matters, and he had stopped being an audience that mattered to her some time ago. Then she was gone and he was left in the silence of his own house with the full accounting of what had happened across the period since he had walked away from the altar. Adaeze visited once. She walked into the room where he was by the window and he turned at the sound of her, and the turn itself cost him, the physical effort of it visible in the way he absorbed it, and when he saw her face the tears came before he had decided to allow them to come, from a place below decision, from the specific depth of a man who knows what he has done and what it has cost and is confronting the full weight of both in the presence of the person who paid the largest part of the cost. She stood a few feet from him and looked at him clearly. She did not soften the looking and she did not harden it. She said she had received his message. She said she was glad she had been positioned to help. She said what NECA had done was criminal and deserved to be treated as a crime regardless of the history that surrounded it. She said she wanted him to understand that what she had done she had not done to return to where they had been or to build something from the rubble of what had happened. She said she had done it because it was right and because right was the only reason she had ever needed for doing anything. She stepped a little closer. She said she needed him to understand something honestly. She said the injury and the fraud had not taken his life from him. She said the choices he had made had created conditions that Nneka had exploited, and that there was a significant moral difference between those two things, and that the difference mattered because one was something that had been done to him and one was something he had participated in creating. She said she was not saying this to increase his pain. She said she was saying it because she had spent 3 years giving him the most accurate available picture of things and she was not going to stop doing that now simply because the picture was painful. He had always deserved the truth from her. He still deserved it. She looked at him for a moment in the way of someone completing something that has been waiting to be completed. She said she hoped he healed. She said it without any condition attached to the hoping, without any expectation that the healing would produce anything she would be part of or would benefit from. She meant it entirely. Then she walked out of the room and did not look back because she had made a decision about her direction a long time ago and she was not in the habit of reversing well-made decisions because the terrain around them had changed. Tabena sat by the window after she left and thought about a networking event 3 years ago and a woman who had walked over to him while everyone else was walking away. He thought about what she had asked him and the way she had asked it and what all of it had eventually become. He sat with the full accounting of it, not because anyone was requiring him to but because he was a man with a great deal of time and nowhere comfortable to put it, and honesty was one of the few things that remained entirely available to him regardless of his physical condition. He sat with it and he understood it completely and he held it without the distraction of being able to act because acting was not currently available and all he had was the understanding. Some understandings, he was discovering, are only possible when everything else has been removed. Adaeze Okonkwo continued. She had always continued. She built her firm into something that bore her name with the same precision and integrity that her father had applied to engineering and her mother had applied to business. She became known in her industry not for the story of what had happened to her, though the story was known, but for the quality of what she produced in every room she entered, the accuracy of her assessments, the consistency of her delivery, the specific value of being able to trust that what she said was what she believed and what she believed was what the evidence supported. She mentored founders. She found the ones who had something real and had not yet found the right way to communicate it and she sat across from them and gave them the truth about what was working and what was not and why. She brought to this work everything she had learned, not only about strategy and presentation and investor behavior, but about what it means to build something that lasts and what it means to build on a foundation that cannot hold what you are trying to put on it, and the critical importance of knowing the difference before the weight is applied. She was not broken by what had happened. She had been hurt, which is different, because hurt is what happens when someone who genuinely invests receives a genuine betrayal and Adaeze had always been someone who invested genuinely. The hurt had been real and she had allowed it to be real and then she had allowed it to become the data it was always going to become for a person built the way she was built, data about the gap between how people present themselves and who they are when the pressure is real, data that made her already excellent judgment sharper and more complete. She lived her life forward. She built things that bore her name and stood on foundations she had laid herself and did not require anyone else's endorsement to be real. She did not require the recognition of the people who had not seen her accurately before to confirm what she already knew about herself, which was that she had always been the primary structure. She had simply, for a time, allowed the structure to be described by someone else's name. She had needed the altar and the fall and the 28th morning to fully arrive at the simplest version of what had always been true. That she was enough. That she had always been enough. That the measure of a person is not who chooses them but what they choose to build after the choosing. She built accordingly. She always had. And the evidence she left in the world continued to accumulate, quietly, precisely, exactly as she had always intended. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful emotional stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us this. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone you built could not stay? Tell us in the comments. Your story matters here. There are many more stories coming to this channel and they go even deeper than this one. Thank you for watching Bishop Tales. We will see you in the next story.